Stephen Chicken here, and I'm joined by Doug Thomson and Mel Booth, three former Examiner writers now, me more recently than you two. I think we'll talk about some of our experiences and memories from our time covering Huddersfield Town. I'm still doing it, obviously, with weareterriers.com. But Mel, it's got to get that plug in, haven't we?
Nice plug.
Mel, you were the first of three of us to go to the Examiner back in '85, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
What was your experience then? What was your background, and what was the Examiner like when you started there?
It was a great local newspaper. I mean, the Examiner, it's been at the heart of this community for 170 odd years, and obviously since the football club started, it's been there every single day. So, the Examiner and the football club are really closely linked together. And so when you go to work at the Examiner, and I was working at the Morning Telegraph in Sheffield before I started at the Examiner. And the more, when you step into that role, you realise that the responsibility that goes with it. I mean, the days were different then. There was no internet, no mobile phones, nothing like that. So it was totally different, and we were really the biggest link between the supporters and the football club. And so, things have changed drastically over the years, haven't they? I used a typewriter. You mentioned that to any young supporter these days, and it's a museum piece. So that's what it was like. And you typed one paragraph on your opening sheet of paper, off it went to the sub-editor. That was your intro.
Right.
3 paragraphs after that, 3 paragraphs after that, however long your story was, and it just went bit by bit to a hot metal compositor in the end of the days, and that's how the paper was printed. So totally different times, and of course you had a one-on-one relationship with the manager. You went to see him every single day in his office to find out what the latest news was. So it was a very close relationship, and you obviously made a working relationship with every manager who came along. I mean, Mick Buxton was in charge when I first started, and it was great. And he'd obviously been massively successful, a real legend of the club already. When I started covering the club, I took over from Paul Clark, who'd done a fantastic job covering the 79-80 promotion team. Before him it was Martin Hardy, who's still around. Before him, people remember Longfellow, Alan Driscoll. I mean, Alan Driscoll was still working at the Examiner when I started.
Yeah.
So there was a connection there. I could go to Alan and ask him about certain things that had happened in the not too distant past at that time, and that was great. Bill Mallinson had done it for a while before him, and I met Lewis Firth, who was the former sports editor who covered Town back in the 1920s. So you got a real flavour. Yeah, exactly. You got a real flavour for the history of the club. And how the newspaper had gone about covering all the big events that have happened at Huddersfield Town, and in fact happened throughout the district. But Huddersfield Town, I always said they're the biggest thing that the Examiner covers.
Yeah.
And you've got to get a grasp of that, because you only realise later in life how much the coverage has meant to people. So. It's very sad to be talking now. We're all former football writers, and there's going to be no one else following on.
Yeah, I mean, Doug, we'll bring you in. You were 1989, was it?
Yeah.
And then a spell away, and then came back.
Substitute in the early days.
There you go. So, Mel's touched on sort of working on the typewriters. I'm interested because for me on a match day, I'll come in, I'll have my laptop, everything goes online straight away on the final whistle, player ratings will go out, match report will go out. How did you, Mel sort of touched on passing, was that in the office you'd be passing it across the sub desk? Yeah. What was it on a match day? Were you phoning it in?
Yeah, generally. I mean, originally, when I first started, you didn't really even have live reports, because it was a sort of in-between period. People probably remember the old Saturday Night Examiner, which came out with all the results in, particular racing results, which was a big seller for it, and the football results, obviously. In those days, you would have had to ring the copy through live as the game was going on a phone. I mean, I can remember for certain games, if they were particularly big games, you'd actually literally take a telephone in with you and ring up. You couldn't hear a word, obviously, because all the crowd was shouting. And then it started to sort of very slowly move into what we'd call new technology, which was very old-fashioned in today's terms, but you could do little bits and pieces on a little word processor, which was also enormous. When I first started, it was that sort of transitionary period where it was doing a night game in particular was very enjoyable, because you didn't really ever have to write the report until the next day, because the paper had gone by that stage generally. Because obviously the deadline was different. The Examiner when I first started came out at lunchtime, so it was pretty much more up to date.
First thing in the morning.
It is now. Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started, we'd come down to Leeds Road, as it was then, interview Neil Warnock was, I think, the first. Owen Hand actually was the first manager I interviewed, and literally go back to the office, write the story, and it'd be in the paper within an hour. So it was that up to date, really. So things have changed in that sense, but. But like Mel said, it was good fun and a really enjoyable thing to do. Yeah.
So I came in 2019. I came in for the last 7 games in the Premier League. So I was working with you, Mel, initially for about a year or so, and then COVID hit, and then that was when you retired.
Yes.
So I'd been sort of solo for the previous 3 years, but I learned an awful lot working with you, because I'd done Football League paper, I'd done Football 365, I'd done plenty of writing, but that day-to-day grind of sort of the covering a club and going to press conferences and the travel at the home and away, all of these things, and developing a relationship with the club as well, is all stuff that I got from you. It's not stuff that I'd done before, so I feel very privileged that I had that sort of year or so with you to learn from the best for me. But you guys obviously were in John Smith Stadium, but you've touched on it. It was Leeds Road when both of you started. Yeah. What are your sort of memories of Leeds Road and the move to the John Smiths, Mel, first of all?
Well, Leeds Road was great. It was a terrific atmosphere when there's a decent crowd in. It was brilliant. I mean, there were a lot of times when there weren't big crowds in. The biggest thing about, literally, and this is true, the biggest thing about moving from Leeds Road to the new stadium was the crowds virtually doubled overnight.
Yeah.
It went from about 6,000-ish to 12,000-ish. Boom. Just like that. So that was a massive thing about the move from the stadium. The old stadium, fantastic as it was crumbling.
Yeah.
It needed a lot of work doing on it. This was a great idea. We're talking 30 years ago almost now, aren't we? It's hard to believe. But it was a great thing at the time that this was, and there were concerts here, there were all sorts of things. It probably hasn't quite evolved how people thought it would do. But from the football club's point of view, it was an essential, really. And as I said, the crowds doubled. They had some success here initially, which was great. And it all helped to kick it off in a new stadium and a new perspective for everybody, really. And it helped. There's some success for the football team helped kick that off nicely. It was sad to leave the old ground, because obviously it's where people had grown up. It's where the dads and the granddads had taken them to stand in the same places, and you don't get that moving to a new stadium. You've got to create new memories. Some of the kids watching Town now will have those memories here.
Yeah.
But for the people who used to watch Town over at Leeds Road, it was a very sad time to leave there. But I think everybody realised that it was essential that the club moved on, and this was a great way to do it. And there have been great times here since. So that's the way it is with football clubs. We're not the only one by many means that have moved, and the old press box wasn't even it wasn't even in an area like it is now.
Yeah.
You were just in the middle of the stand. There were some desks there. The seats were just like the ones that the fans were all sat around here, and it was next to the old director's box, and there was a couple of ladies who did food under the stand for us in the old.
Jean.
Yeah, Jean was one of them, the Irish lady.
Millie.
And we had them. We had some, a little press room under there. But we used to stand at the top of the tunnel to talk to the managers.
Right.
And you
shouting down, or?
No. Just used to stand in the top of the tunnel, and then you grab any player who happened to come wandering out. It was the papers were the link to the fans back in those days. There were no, sorry Raj, there were no media teams at football clubs in those days.
Yeah.
You dealt directly with the people concerned, whether it was the secretary, the chairman, obviously the manager on a day-to-day basis. So times were very different. But it was exciting for the football club to move here.
Yeah, I'm about to say, Doug, I'm sure you have memories of your own of Leeds Road, but I guess for the both of you, it must have been a balance between, in your coverage, between it's sad we're leaving Leeds Road, and also I remember Neil Warnock always used to say how exciting it was to come and see this place get built and sit up on the banks of where the stand wasn't built yet. And,
absolutely.
It must have been tremendously exciting at the time as a reporter.
And as well, I think one of the beauties of coming here geographically was it's just across the road from where Leeds Road was. So I think you know you retained the feel of if you walk down to the stadium, it was the same as walking down to Leeds Road. So that continuity was semi-provided, but it was exciting because it was quite a big thing in those days. Not that many clubs had built new stadiums.
One of the first, weren't they?
Yeah, one of the early ones. And it, when it emerged as a place like this, it was quite futuristic looking. I don't remember any stadium looking like this. Certainly in England, I think Bolton came afterwards and was quite similar.
Yeah.
But it was a really exciting project, and for Huddersfield, it was a massive thing. because. Without being disrespectful, it's quite a traditional old school town. And it was a really big thing to happen, and it brought a lot of probably worldwide attention, really.
Yeah, because the shape of the stands was really notable, wasn't it?
And just the whole idea of physically moving the entire club, and obviously the rugby league club being part of it as well. They were at Fartown, latterly played at Leeds Road as well. So it sort of embraced the whole town's sporting heritage, if you like, in one place.
As a club writer, it's kind of you're lucky if it's once in a lifetime as well, isn't it? A stadium move. I mean, the town have only done it the once, so and you guys were lucky enough to do it. I mean, Neil Warnock was the manager at the time. I was lucky enough to get sort of 6-7 months with Neil myself. But Neil always, I remember even before he came to town, Mel, people would always tell me, Neil's always, people from Cardiff or Middlesbrough would say, Neil's always talking about Mel Booth from the Huddersfield Examiner. I mean, you guys had a great relationship with Neil. Any other managers who particularly stand out as well, and any particular memories of Neil or anyone else? You form a working relationship with all of them. Obviously, one way and another, some are a bit more rocky than others. If the season's not going well, it's not nice to have to talk to people when they're in a time of stress, basically. But Neil was fantastic. Before him, I mentioned Mick Buxton. Mick was great. He knew the score about everything, so he wouldn't leave you without a tale. Neil was fantastic. Obviously, there were two great seasons under him first time around. 2 Wembleys, very memorable. Some great games as well. And then afterwards, Jacko was terrific. The Great Escape season was a very underrated achievement. He did a fantastic job. Really, some terrific games there, and really, Jacko got the passion of the fans as well. I mean, he was a colossus of a player anyway, so he was already popular. But then to go in and do such a good job as manager as well, I think, doesn't quite get mentioned often enough, really. After that, I got on really well with Steve Bruce. That team did superbly well. At one point, they just missed out on promotion, but they were a really good team to watch. I mean, nobody ever mentions them beating Crystal Palace 7-1. I mean, they murdered them that day. It was fantastic. Brilliant football. Stewie was in his pomp at that time. So they were a really good side to watch. People since then have not been quite as close to some of the more modern managers, but David was good to work with. Danny Cowley got on really well with. Had a lot of respect for Danny, and that was my last match. I think at the stadium was covering the West Brom game where Emil Smith-Rowe scored against West Brom.
to keep us up, to actually make it mathematically official.
Because you and I were alternating, weren't we? It was COVID, so you were doing home. We could only have one in the stands. I was watching that from home.
And
so
you were doing away, and that was the night it became. There were only about maybe 30 or 40 people.
Yeah, it's weird. You think of it as the stadium being full in your mind's eye, don't you? But obviously, of course, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So,
but that was a great night. Yeah, although I finished the following pre-season. That was the last match covering the first team, so that was a good way to go out. But there have been lots of managers in between, the likes of Brian Horton and Jacko's second time around was fantastic.
Yeah.
The promotion at Cardiff against Mansfield, that was what a wonderful season. To get a team of kids, I think you'd only half a dozen people training on the first day of pre-season. A lot of kids, 2 or 3 really good experienced players. They end up winning promotion in the playoffs. It was another remarkable achievement. Really good. Some really good people to work with and to get to know. And as you mentioned, I had a terrific relationship with Neil. That was probably as good as it gets for any local reporter.
I remember you telling me once, because in those days you would go in and meet the manager once a week, was it, and get a briefing. So it wasn't like, for me, I go into the training ground, we do a press conference, people are there on Zoom, people are there in the training ground, but it's still, it's very organised by the club. You would go in and have you guys would have gone in for a cup of tea, would you, with the managers?
Every day of the week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
there you go.
You sit down, you'd wait for them obviously to do the footballing business of the day, and then they'd set aside quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, you'd go in, have a cup of tea, chat about what was going on.
Right.
You'd got to get back to the office to write up a story for that day, that's how it worked. And you just saw them every day, saw them match days as well. Quite often you could ring them. I remember ringing the likes of Steve Bruce on a Sunday, Lou McCarey. Lou was really good on a Sunday, made himself available. So you'd got a chance to get a new fresh line for the Monday output.
Yeah.
So it was terrific. We had some managers who knew the score and they knew that what you needed out of them. Once you got that working relationship going, it was very good.
I remember you told me once that you went in to see, was it Warnock you went to see once, and he said, I've got nothing for you, Mel. We'll just have to make something up.
I always said this. He was like that, was Neil. I always said this. I probably didn't say it to you maybe at the time, but I certainly remember saying it to Doug. Was that always keep a line for the following day, because you never know when you're going to get left without anything.
The same day, and Mel told me off a little bit. And it's one of those journalistic lessons that's always lasted with me. So I always take Mel's advice.
In those days, you could do it because there wasn't the internet. There wasn't any of that. So
because for me, if you don't put it out, someone else will. Yeah,
exactly.
In those days, we decided when the news was going out. So
I soon learnt that.
Yeah, I mean, what? How about you, Doug? Any particular managers stand out, or any press conferences, anything?
I mean, funnily enough, before we did this interview, I totted them up, and I think in the 10 or 11 seasons I covered Town, there was 8 different managers, which is a sign of modern football.
I've totted it up.
Watford, there'd have been a few more.
I've totted it up, and I've had 7.
But likewise, Mel, I mean, like you said, it's a bit mixed, because obviously there's some people you get on better with, others on a personal level. But bizarrely, the two that I probably most enjoyed working with are two that nobody would remember as being particularly successful managers, which would be Lou McCarey, who was just a really nice bloke, and you could have a chat with him about more than football, and Stan Turnant, funnily enough, because he was just such a sort of Marmite figure, and he and I hit it off quite well, bizarrely. I don't know why, but we did. And when you'd sort of got into his confidence, he was great, and had a fund of really good stories about football, and he was willing to talk about things other than football sometimes. And because that's so strange. That's what sticks in my mind about the managers I work with, and obviously David Wagner as well. I think it's worth mentioning, because he was quite different to anything we'd had before. It was a kind of new venture with him being from Germany, and nobody knew much about him. And it did take a little while to get going, which people forget about. But when it did get going, it was brilliant.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Danny Cowley, I thought, was great with us, would always give us plenty to go at, always interesting. I know not everyone loved what he had to say at all times, but for us, he was, he made it easy to work with. Obviously, Neil, it was incredible. Carlos and I were a little bit fractious at times. He once called me mean. Mean. But to be fair, I was quite critical of Carlos, and I think I've learned from that. I mean, you guys yourselves, I'm sure you learn as you go in, as writers, and I sort of learned from Carlos not to try not to write people off too soon. And I'm thinking about Darren Moore at the moment and the injuries he's got. I think this season so far is quite similar to Carlos's first season in many ways, and I think I was probably a bit too harsh on Carlos, actually, in hindsight. I know results weren't good, but I think when I look back now, there was a lot of factors going against him that were outside his control, and I think that has sort of informed my coverage as you go. And I guess you can confirm, Doug, that you do pick up those things, and the more experience you have, the more you think back and think, I've seen this before. Everything happens again, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, it's interesting you say that, because I had my runners with Lee Clark. But
who didn't?
Exactly. But the thing you sort of need to remember is that the pressure that they're under.
Yeah.
They're in the goldfish bowl, aren't they?
Oh yeah, we're the horrible outsiders, aren't we?
You're the first person that they come into contact with after having a discussion about certain things, and they take it out on you. And sometimes you've just got to accept that and try.
It's part of the job, isn't it?
Try not to take it too personally.
You know, don't you, that you're not always going to be a welcome sight for someone else.
Because sometimes you are pointing out things that they don't want pointed out. And sometimes, to be fair to them, you may not know everything that's going on in the situation that they're in.
100%.
So you try to couch it that things are never quite as bad as everybody thinks they are. But when things are good, they're never quite as good as everybody thinks they are. So you're somewhere floating in.
There's always more sides to every, more than one side to each story, isn't there? And I think you try and remember that as you go along, and pick up how to judge people and deal with them, and allow them that little bit of leeway. I
think in our day, though, back, until recent times, you had more time to sit down, speak with the manager, the secretary,
and I think
the chairman.
The nature of the game's changed, hasn't it? There's far more pressure. I mean, there's always been pressure, and people involved in competitive sport have always been winners and been desperate to win. But it's even more heightened these days by lots of different factors. So if you look back into, I remember Owen Hand particularly, it was almost like a game of cat and mouse with him. You'd try and be finding out about a transfer, and he'd be joking about it, and he didn't take offence by it. He was interested that you wanted to know, and he sort of tested you if you could find things out, and it was almost like a game, really. But
Owen was great to work with.
Brilliant.
Really good fella.
I'm interested in your highlights and lowlights as well, covering Town. Any particular games that stand out? Any particular moments? I mean, you've had administration, you've had relegation, you've had promotion, you've had Wembley for the cup final. What stands out to you, Mel, when just off the top of your head?
There are lots of matches and occasions, big Wembleys and things like that. Really, a couple of really exciting games. There was one we drew 4-4 at Bury.
It came from behind, didn't we?
It was 1991. We drew 4-4 at Bury, 4-0 down.
4-0
down. And I think the crowd was just over 4,000, and 2,000 of them were from Huddersfield. And the crowd that day had so much influence on turning the game around. It was unbelievable. And people who were there still say this. They remember that day. Just like the people who were at the Brentford semi-final in '95 when Bully scored the winning penalty. And at half-time, everybody was crammed in that end at Brentford. And they were singing Runaway, I think it was.
Yes, it was,
Everybody remembers it, who was there. And that Bury game sticks out, particularly for the Examiner, because we had a fantastic picture of Ewan Roberts with his teeth missing, with a big smile on his face after he scored the equaliser. And that was an astonishing match, really, and it was a nothing league game away at Bury, but it really sticks in my mind. The semi-final of the Autoglass Trophy
Carlisle.
Carlisle.
Oh, that was brilliant.
When Town were 4-1 up going into the second leg, and then found some found themselves 2-0 down.
Mel mentioned that because in my mind's eye, Carlisle scored. He must have been 30 yards out. I can't remember who scored it, but it was one of those cracking drives.
And
I can still see that ball flying through the air and hitting the back of the net, and thinking, oh no, because we were up from the first leg and then almost messed it up, but somehow.
The first person I saw coming out the changing room was Jacko, when Town had actually got through after about 11 minutes of injury time.
He is,
And it was Jacko, obviously, with
one of yours there, Doug.
would go on to lead Town out at Wembley but not actually play, which I know he was extremely put up about. But he was the first person out of the changing rooms at Carlisle and grabbed hold of me in a bear hug. And honestly, I swear he cracked 3 ribs. But everyone was so elated that Town were going back to Wembley. And to be on the team bus when they actually went to Wembley for that final, first time in 50 odd years that the club had been back to Wembley, and to see all the Town fans on the front of the stadium as the bus arrived was certainly something I'll never forget.
How about you, Doug?
In terms of memorable matches?
Yeah.
I've probably 2 that stick out in my mind. One was and last game of the season, Leyton Orient. People probably know what I'm going to say, but Andy Booth scored his 150th Town goal in his final game for Town, and even the Orient supporters got up and started clapping.
Lovely.
That was great, really, and to see Booth had been such a sort of hometown storybook kind of hero, really, wasn't he? That was great, and the other one I remember is the playoff final against Sheffield United, where Alex Smithies scored the penalty, which was to put Town through.
Yeah, of course,
His keeper missed the penalty.
Simonson, was it?
Yeah, that was amazing, because it was just such a weird penalty shootout, because obviously all
11,
the early people missed the penalties, and the ones who weren't chosen to take them scored.
The first 3 Town, was it?
So.
Yeah,
they missed the first 3. In fact, I think they're still the only club ever to do that, to miss the first 3 and win a penalty shootout.
Yeah, incredible. I mean,
certainly were anyway.
Was that 2? Sorry, did you do your 2? Did you do both? Yeah. I think for me, obviously the playoff final. It's the first time I've covered football at Wembley, 2022, and obviously the result didn't go their way. But obviously before that, there was the Luton game here. That semi-final was incredible.
Oh, gosh,
that was something else. Yeah, really, I'll always remember that.
I always remember Nathan Jones after it.
Yeah, I know. But I think probably also that they beat Fulham in that season in the build up to, and I think that was the game, Mel, where we thought, obviously I was solo by that point, but Town were brilliant that day. I don't think I gave anyone below an 8 out of 10, which I've never done in any other game. They were sensational, winning 2-1 away at Fulham, who ran away with the league that year. And that, I think, was the game where I think up to that point everyone was like, oh, are we really going to do a playoff push here? And then it was when they beat Fulham away that everyone went, oh, this is actually happening. Like, this is sustainable. They're actually going to go for it. And unfortunately.
Just on player markings.
Yeah.
Remember 2 10s.
Oh.
Effie Sodje at Oxford.
Oxford, yeah.
He could ever play better as a centre-back than he did that game, and he scored the winner, I think.
Yeah,
wow.
The entire Oxford crowd were on his back.
Absolutely, after that incident here with their big centre-forward, I've forgotten his name. And Nico Vasson, goalkeeper, got a 10. I think it was against Bradford City. And Nico was a great goalkeeper, obviously we had some good ones.
You should mention Effie Sodje, which has just reminded me, I think in my experience he's the only player that's ever come to find a reporter after the game ask if you want to interview him. Great bloke.
Did you ever, was it Mel doing the ratings when you were there, or did you have any
I sort of did them afterwards, yes.
Any 10s from you?
I think I might have given Alex Smithies a 10 one time,
right.
Which I often pointed out to him when he used to criticise me for the time. I've 10.
I've done it once, and that was sober against Reading a couple of years ago. Again, the playoff season, he played against Reading. I think he set up 2 and scored 1, and he was absolutely unplayable that day. And I turned around to DTS sort of about 75 minutes in, and Eleanor obviously, and I said, I'm going to give Sorba a 10. I've never done it before or since, but yeah, I mean, we touched on a couple of players there. Are any particular, Doug, players that stand out to you from your time working for the Examiner and covering Town?
In terms of performance-wise?
Yeah, or players, both. I mean, either players that you've enjoyed watching, players that you enjoyed talking to and getting to know.
I've mentioned Andy Booth, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, any Town.
Everyone loves Booth, yeah.
I'm not just saying that because he's still around, but you know, very modest kind of guy.
He's standing over there watching.
And players that I enjoyed interviewing, I'd probably say Alan Lee, really good bloke, always up for a chat about anything really, never minded if you rung him up, always happy to talk. Conor Cody sticks in my mind just because he was such a nice, and it, you know, you don't often say it, but it was so good to see him make his mark in the Premier League because he was just such a nice, helpful bloke and a really good player as well. And I also enjoyed working with Luke Beckett because he was, for me, he was a sort of down-to-earth, very humble sort of ordinary bloke, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that. That made the most of his talent and just was a good guy and had a good balance about life, and you know, he was just a great person to work with.
I'm going to chuck one in on that note. Will Boyle is a top lad.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they do come along, don't they? Not everybody's as people see footballers in a certain way, and a lot of them aren't like that. Really.
Yeah. How about you, Mel? Anyone off the pitch, on the pitch?
Well, loads, obviously. Yeah, I've been going back to the early days of people who don't get talked about anymore. Joey Jones was here. Joey was fantastic. He was a real character. Fantastic guy. You know, spoke out against the club management for getting rid of Mick Buxton when they did. He was a very principled but very, you know, real good character to have around the place. Made everybody laugh. Was a terrific footballer as well, by the way. He was towards the end of his career when he sort of came here, but Joey was brilliant to deal with. And I still got the sort of, some of the players were still here from the promotion seasons under Mick, so the likes of Brian Stanton. Brian's a great guy. The great Malcolm Brown.
Yeah.
Who was...
As you're obliged to call him.
You know, you know, he was my favourite player. I mean, obviously, Boothie and people like that, you know, go without question, but Malcolm Brown was fantastic.
A mate of mine, by the way, used to think when he was a kid that you were Andy Booth's dad. Rich.
We're not related as far as I know. There we go. Yeah, no. Yeah, Malcolm Brown, you know, there was still, Malcolm had come back to the club from Newcastle when I first started, and you know, Malcolm was great. But so many players down the years have been so helpful, as have the staff at the club.
Yes, yeah.
You know, you get to know people like, you know, Anne Hoff, who's still here, Sue Beaumont, who's just retired. Sue, just fantastic. But so many people close to the club who've been, you know, really helpful and friendly and made the job enjoyable. And I'm sure it's not the same for everybody, but over a long number of years we've been very fortunate to have that relationship and those sort of calibre of people around the place.
I'll just chuck my players in before we go on to that, but yeah, I mean, seeing Levi Colwell, who immediately it was like, well, this lad's going to captain England one day. Watching him was like, you felt sort of privileged to be watching a player like him. And off the pitch, I always really enjoy talking to Tom Lees. I just think he never uses a cliche, always thinks about his answers. You love players like that. You know, when you get it, I think sometimes when you're in the room, you're like, oh, I'm not, you know, this is all right. And then you get it on the page, it's like, oh, this is really good stuff, actually. But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, you're always, I don't know if people necessarily realise that half of the stuff the work that we do doesn't make it into the newspaper. You know, you're always talking to people, you're always making inquiries, you're always like, what's the story with this, what's the explanation for that? And there is an element of trust that you have to build up with likes of DTS and Raj, with people like, you know, we've all worked with Dean Hoyle, Kevin Nagel now, obviously. It's part of the job, and I imagine for you guys even more so with managers and players, because you'll have had a lot more day-to-day contact with them than I do, where understandably now things are a little bit more stage managed. You get the access, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit more stage managed. But as you touched on, Mel and Doug, it's having those relationships within the club is vital, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, sometimes people will tell you something off the record, and that enables you to put a more accurate, or provide a more accurate view, even though you're not actually saying the thing that you were told.
Yeah, you nudge towards something, don't you?
Gives you a better idea of the background to something.
Yeah, you do get that trust. I mean, I was particularly close to like the '95 promotion team. You know, there's some great characters in there. You know, Darren Bullock and Tom Cowan and Lee Sinnott, Boothie, Jeppo. You know, you get close to them and they would trust you with things as well. And you know, you even now, 30 years later, you can have a conversation like it was yesterday, because you've got that common theme. Yeah,
I think people might wonder, like, are you just not doing your job if you're talking to people and not putting it in the paper? But I think what people do, particularly in our job, where we're the local person on the ground, we're dealing with these people every day. The tabloids, the nationals, can come in and publish whatever, and it doesn't matter to them. Their relationship with the club doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But for us, we need to always keep in mind, don't we, that look, if someone tells us something off the record and we break that trust, not only are they not going to talk to us again, they're going to tell everyone at the club, don't trust this person.
And that's part of the job, really, isn't it? You know,
So, but you always try and represent both sides. You know, I always see myself as being between sort of the fans and the club, and I think if the fans have a good point about something, you put that point forward and you put that voice forward. But if the club, you feel they're coming in for harsh criticism than they deserve, or perhaps the fans don't have the full picture for why certain things are happening, you can also put that view forward. And I think it's always a delicate balance, isn't it, between those two. But hopefully, if you get it right, you end up with both sets of people respecting you and thinking you're doing a good job.
Occasionally you get it wrong, and you learn from it, don't you? You try and learn from it.
Yeah, there are obviously ups and downs along the way. That's the nature of the beast. But you know, as a newspaper man, as we were in the old days, it was, you know, with no internet, no websites out there. You know, you were the main contact between the fans and the club, as I've said before, and there was a responsibility to get the news for the supporters. Yeah, that was your job,
which remains the case. You know, because you know, for me,
it's an interesting point. Why we're here about the Examiner, there's still that need, isn't there? You know, people still want news. That's the thing that's sad and disappointing, I think, to all of us, is that appetite for news and appetite for news about town especially still exists massively.
And I think these days you can get a lot of that news, you know, your injury stuff. This is why when we set up weareterriers.com, where you can now get all your quality Huddersfield Town content, we sort of thought, well, a lot of this news, it goes on Twitter straight away. You can watch the press conferences on this YouTube channel. Like, people can get that stuff. And I know that there is still a need, you know, don't get me wrong, there's still people who aren't on Twitter, aren't on YouTube, aren't listening to podcasts, who need to get that news through other means. But it is out there, it's reported. I think news kind of these days is cheap, but I think what people need, again, from the local club writer is that analysis and that, well, why is this the case? Really, exactly. So, you know, there's reporting about, you know, let's say the stadium at the moment. We know the club are in talks about what's happening with the future of the stadium. I get asked constantly what's going on with that, and you know, you can, if you're doing a hard news angle, then you are waiting for the next concrete development to happen before you're reporting. But in my position, you can offer opinion on it. You can say, well, as I understand it, this is the situation.
Exactly.
And that applies to transfers as well. You know, rumours again in the Nationals are very cheap, but as the local, we are there to say yes, no, maybe, don't put too much stock in it. There's a lot of considerations, aren't there?
There are. Absolutely.
So, Mel, what are you up to these days? Happily retired.
Retirement, thank you, yeah.
I'm amazed you're in the country at the moment.
Very funny. Just retired. Obviously, I still come to the home games, watching Town. I still keep an eye on the Giants. Still keep an eye on the Rugby Union Club. Still keep an eye on the cricket.
Yeah.
all the the things that
That's where we normally see each other.
when
Scolds, isn't it? You?
yeah, Scolds, my cricket club, yeah. Yeah, they're just all the things that I dealt with when I was sports editor. I tried to keep an eye on all those things and have an odd holiday in between.
Are you aware that mullets have come back into style, by the way?
I am indeed.
Have you ever considered going back to it, follow the
I think
trend?
I would struggle, Steve, somehow. But I mean, at the time I had mine, of course, I was the head of fashion.
Yeah.
Fashion couldn't keep up with me.
I can't criticise. I still had long hair when I came in, and look at me now. That's what 4.5 years of covering Huddersfield Town will do for you. Doug, where can people find your work now? Where can people find your work, Doug?
I am these days working at League Express, so I cover rugby league, which is great fun, and it's brilliant for me because it's continuing. I'm a sports buff. Any kind of sport I love, particularly local sport, northern sport, which rugby league essentially is, isn't it? So I really enjoy my job at League Express. That's great. I'm still involved in the local football scene. I'm involved up at Shelley, who are now back in the North West Counties League, which I may give a plug to.
Unfortunately not in a position to do that, but I am continuing with the Huddersfield Town coverage, as I've mentioned, on weareterriers.com. Yeah, we're doing, as I say, we're not doing day-to-day news, at least not at the moment. Who knows how that might change, but at the moment the offering is 2 quality pieces a week, including 5 conclusions, plus player ratings for free, and a podcast. So the 2 quality pieces and the podcast is £5 a month, which we think is really good value, and hopefully means that people are getting, still getting the information. I've just put, on the day we're recording this, I've just put a Q&A out where people have sent in the questions. So hopefully we're still keeping people informed and providing a bit of analysis that people aren't going to get elsewhere. So guys, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to see you, and always good to catch up with you.
Thank you.